Welcome into a special edition of GNASS as we record this Sunday. I believe it's what, September 25th, week
Number
3 of the
25th.
NFL. Yeah, week 3 of the NFL. Well, this is going to be an interesting episode because the topic we are covering today is Ime Udoka. So, Alex, before we dive into it, you as our resident Celtics fan, obviously, how are you doing today before I guess you burst a blood vessel?
Not great, John. This is, the hits keep coming for this franchise, and you essentially can draw a straight line from the death of Len Bias to this transgression with Ime Udoka. Needless to say, uh, from everything that we know so far, it sounds like the guy's a total pig, and unfortunately, he was a really good coach for this team. And I think the fact that he was a former player, especially, the two stars of this team, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, really responded to him as their coach. And now maybe it's fair to say that they responded to him because he carried himself like a player. And in this, from again, what we know about this situation and this suspension, I think that personality had Udoka thinking with his little head and not his big one, John.
Ime Udoka, by the way, a former player, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yes, yeah, he was a journeyman. Probably played 7-8 seasons in the NBA from like I don't know the mid 2000s or so.
He also had a very extensive career as an assistant, of course, starting off with longtime assistant under Greg Popovich with the San Antonio Spurs. I believe I can't remember what team he was with prior to the Nets. Then, of course, took over as the Nets assistant. And
He was
then,
with Philly with Brett Brown.
okay, there was Philly with Brett Brown, correct. And then taking over, of course, as the Celtics head coach. Alex, I think the first real question is, I mean, we know the punishment for Ime Udoka sounds like he's going to be suspended for the entire season, potentially more along the way. Excuse me. Is this punishment enough given the transgressions that have happened? I mean, and you even said it like Ime Udoka being a really a person who's supposed to be a leader, the person who's supposed to mold Jason Tatum and the other stars and really the young players in this organization.
Right. So I think with Udoka, I think he's coached his last game for the Boston Celtics. I really do. You have to imagine for a team that it looked like they had everything going for them, except for Danilo Gallinari blowing out his knee in the FIBA World Cup. Outside of that, they looked like they were poised. You bring in Malcolm Brogdon, you get that bench score that you didn't have. They looked like they were poised to go on another run, deep playoff run. I think anything short of the conference finals. And, I think the Celtics and Bucks were the odds-on favorites to play in that. And then, so, you get to that and then you see where it shakes out. I don't think the Celtics team would have gotten past Milwaukee if they had a healthy Chris Middleton. I think that's fair to say this past year. But Udoka's done here in Boston. And so far, what we know about the situation is the Celtics managing partner, owner, whatever you want to call him, Wyc Grousbeck, said in his press conference that this was multiple violations of this team policy. And you have to think that for a pro sports franchise that had a lot going for them, that if something like this would happen, if this was a run-of-the-mill office affair, that this would probably be swept under the rug in some way, shape, or form. And not to be that cynical, but that's kind of where all of these things typically go. So you have to think that there was a little more, or I mean, there could have been a lot more there that Udoka did. And the multiple violations thing is, I think, what got him suspended. It's not the fact that he had this affair. So TMZ has their report out, and I really don't want to, their report is that it was some kind of traveling secretary that Udoka had engaged in this relationship with. She was responsible for coordinating me along Ime Udoka's fiance. They've been engaged, I think, for about 7 years actually, and they haven't officially been married. Which everyone's to each their own, John. And
well, I will say this: the positive for Ime Udoka is a lot of this is breaking as Adam Levine's transgressions are breaking. So lucky for him, he's not the shittiest person in the news this week,
right? And so Ime Udoka should be grateful for one Adam Levine. But and then I don't know if you caught on Twitter, Kevin Frazier. I believe he's still a host with Entertainment Tonight, but he was a longtime Sports Center anchor, so I think he definitely has connections to the sports world. Still, he said, for him, multiple sources. Let me dig him up. I should have had this prepared. Stand by, John.
No worries, but the point being with Ime Udoka is if it's multiple transgressions, his tenure with the Celtics, despite being very successful, including a finals appearance in his first season, really could be coming to an end and coming to an end very abruptly. I know right now it's just a suspension, Alex, but to your point, this is multiple transgressions that he's being caught with. Um, yeah, not ideal. One thing quickly, we can just run through Ime Udoka's career stats because one of my questions coming up is how quickly do we think he's going to get a job once the suspension is lifted? But Ime Udoka, 613 win percentage this past season, regular and postseason, 632 career win percentage as a coach. Alex, you ready to go?
Yes. So,
Okay.
so Kevin Frazier's report was that this staffer's husband found out about this affair from listening to a smart doorbell. I presume it'd be an Amazon Ring, a Ring doorbell recording. So
Oh,
if you're
that's good. That's
so,
good.
and then that's kind of how this all unraveled. And this is just me purely speculating. I have nothing to go on here, but when something like this happens and the fact that it came to light, the Celtics took this unprecedented situation, which I do want to get back to suspending their coach seemingly out of the blue until, because all we had was Wojnarowski's first tweet. And that was the first anyone really heard of this. So you can imagine there's probably some scenario where this husband finds out about this and maybe this woman cuts it off and Udoka could have been, harassing her, and maybe that's them, or it could have been multiple staffers that we still don't know within the Celtics organization. And so I guess I'm kind of two minds when it comes to how the Celtics went about handling this situation, because somebody in the organization, you have to imagine it came from within the Celtics who leaked this to Wojnarowski, or you got wind that there was this ongoing investigation.
It could keep in mind one thing that has been more or less mentioned with Woj in particular is that he does have a lot of ties with the Brooklyn Nets organization. And of course, Udoka previously being with the Brooklyn Nets could have been some sort of link there. But either way, continue.
Right. So all we had was that Woj tweet to go on. And so the Celtics, they left this hang out there for 24 plus hours. And in that time, the Twitter social media speculation machine went into high gear, and there was a lot of innuendo about various female staffers within the Celtics organization who it might have been, which is totally unfair to them. So the organization left those staffers out to dry for 24 hours before this press conference was called.
That's shameful.
So that's shameful.
Yeah.
However, by the same token, we demand accountability from these organizations, right? And I think if Wyc Grousbeck, gun to his head, or you gave him that truth serum, would tell you, I didn't want to suspend my coach, but my hands, and he said in the press conference, my hands were tied. There's really no blueprint to go about doing this. So when you compare this, it's a low bar, but you look at the Blackhawks, you look at Penn State, you look at any of these organizations that have had these crises happen, and they failed dramatically. So not that I think the Celtics deserve any applause for how they've gone about it, but on one hand, they did took decisive action here. And I think if you ask most Celtics fans, they don't care what Ime Udoka has done behind the scenes. And the Celtics didn't want to open themselves up to letting this guy continue in his capacity and potentially further this behavior, or this pattern of behavior.
Yeah, 100%. And to back to that point, so Ime Udoka suspended right now. Alex, you suspect that he will not return to the Celtics, of course.
I think he's done in Boston, and I think the reason why he was supposedly the team found out about this in July, the reason why he hasn't been fired yet is I think the Celtics they know how good of a coach he is, and they don't want him to get picked up this season by someone.
Well, that was about to be my next question is how quickly do you think Ime Udoka would get picked up? Because I think as long as he's Celtics property, he's obviously not going to get signed, but they don't, to your point, they don't want any competitors to pick him up. I think the first chance he's probably getting signed, especially if this is a team imposed punishment as opposed to a league one. What about you?
So I think when the suspension ends, and again, there's no way. Either if he wants to get any of his money, maybe they agree that he can't coach in the league for X amount of years and to recoup some of that money. But, and I don't know how the particulars of that deal would work, or if that's even, legal by the NBA's, bylaws or whatever.
It all depends on it. I'm sure they can work out a buyout, but
so the issue then becomes, how much worse does this get? If again, we find out this is a more or less run of the mill office workplace affair. Yeah, Udoka, because TMZ is on this, and I think the way that press conference went in the Boston Globe's Dan Shaughnessy had asked Brad Stevens, what kind of vetting was done for Udoka. The Globe might have something, so stay tuned there. And maybe there's this pattern of behavior where he's been a chauvinist pig and at his other stops in his professional career. Who knows?
If that's the case, he's done for career wise too.
Right. And so, I think if this gets bad and this was like serious sexual harassment and he was told repeatedly to stop, then it'll be a while before he coaches in the league. I'm not going to say he'll never coach again, because there's probably some morally bankrupt franchise somewhere that
we know that as long as you have talent, you can do a number of things and still have an opportunity in most professional sports leagues. Unfortunately, that's sort of the issue as to why the cultures of these teams is so poor, and it's endemic in the sports as well. Alex, let's move on from Udoka though. We'll stay with the Celtics. If you're the Celtics, where do you go from here? Who do you want to coach? Do you think if you're Brad Stevens, you step back down on the court, or excuse me, not, I guess.
Yeah.
No, sorry, not yet. Yes, Brad Stevens. Sorry, totally thought I was thinking of.
So this is where
of Utah Jazz president Danny Ainge for a second. My apologies.
Yeah, no, it's all good. This is where I'm concerned about the Celtics. You give the keys to a first-time NBA head coach now, is the interim guy in Joe Mazzulla, who has his own baggage, by the way. He was arrested when he was playing at West Virginia. I don't know all the details, but he was arrested essentially for physical assault. He put his hands around a woman's throat. I don't know if he was actually strangling her. I imagine the charges probably would have been a lot more serious if that was the case. But the guy, he has his own baggage here. So but it is interesting that he was the one holdover from Brad Stevens' staff that was put onto Ime Udoka's staff. I think that's not going to sit well with Udoka's people. I thought if you were going to name an interim coach on the staff, I thought Damon Stoudemire was the guy, because he coached, I think 6 or 7 years at Pacific. He's been an NBA All-Star. So he's, I guess, in a similar psyche that Udoka brings. So elevating Mazzulla over him, I don't know if that was a good call. And look, I've been saying this about the Celtics for years, since Tatum and Brown have matured, at least into legitimate NBA stars, that there's still an immaturity factor with this basketball team. I will go to my grave saying this. I don't think the Golden State Warriors won the NBA Finals. The Boston Celtics lost that NBA Finals. And all of their bad habits came back to bite them in the ass in that series. So now you remove the coach who had all of their heads screwed on straight to get to the NBA Finals, because again, the question with this team was not the talent. It was, do they have the mental fortitude to compete night in, night out? And that definitely wasn't happening. So now you bring in this inexperienced coach who, again, has his own baggage, and it's a little frustrating. The Celtics, given why they're suspending their head coach now, you bring in a guy who's had a history of
that's what I was going to say too.
Woman.
That's what I was going to say. It's not exactly the best look from a PR movie. They're too you're suspending like your head coach for those transgressions with like women who work within your organization, and then you're bringing in a guy who has this kind of a history.
Right. And well, he was already on the staff. He wasn't in this high profile position.
No, obviously, but that's also why I asked if you're Brad Stevens at this point, like, do you almost
I think Brad Stevens does have to come downstairs and coach this team like Pat Riley did in 2006 with the Heat.
Exactly. And that was kind of the parallel I was thinking of too.
Your team is too damn close, and you can't let this be the reason why you don't go back to the NBA Finals. It's that you don't have, and not that I had problems with Brad as the coach. I thought he kept his rotation way too big, and he wasn't good at telling people, no, this is exactly what your role is. I think it might be a little bit different if Steven said, I'm going downstairs for 1 year and I need to get this right. And I think the players might have a newfound respect for him, knowing that if we don't do what he's asking of us, he can ship our ass out of town. Marcus Smart. So
I also think there's a degree of maturity too, specifically with Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. We've seen Tatum especially like take that next step and become one of the top 4 or 5 players.
ESPN has him ranked 7 this year in the league.
That I'd argue that might even be a bit low.
I think he's between 5 and 7. I think that's
exactly. And like I think he's a good enough player now where he knows that he needs to take the reins of this, and he needs to understand like I watched this documentary on Kyle Lowry, and one thing Kyle said is he learned later on, once he matured, he needed to be coached to become a better player. And I think Jason's starting to realize that. And Jaylen Brown's always had that type of, work ethic and knowledge within him. But I think that whole team is starting to realize that. And to your point, they need to get this under control as fast as possible.
Right. And that's where the maturity question is still going to, unless this team comes out and they prove that, yep, going to the NBA Finals was no fluke. And they are saying we're at the top of the Eastern Conference right now, and someone's going to have to come and knock us off, which, I mean, I think it's them and the Bucks, or at least on paper, it's them and the Bucks. So this maturity question, if they don't, short of doing that, what I just described, and you have, like, what if Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum think that what Udoka did is no big deal, and then they're pissed at the management because they think they were too hard on their coach that they wanted the team to bring in. And so that's that remains to be seen. And media day is Monday, tomorrow, the 26th in Boston. So get your popcorn ready for that one. That should be quite the day.
So it looks like we'll have a pretty quick answer to see if the Celtics are on board with the decisions that are being made.
Not that they would voice it publicly, but
no, never. Oh, God,
yeah,
no, never.
If Brown is, a little prickly with the media, I think we can take a fair guess as to why.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening into this special edition of GNASS. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell. It really helps with the algorithm. And thank you again. And we appreciate you guys for listening and watching. Alex, any thoughts for our viewers?
May this be a lesson to everyone out there. Always think with the big head and not the little one.